I have lived long enough now that the winters blur together. The hard ones, the soft ones, the ones that took something from me and the ones that gave something back. But that autumn in Colorado, the year I turned 31, stands apart from all the rest. I could not tell you the color of a single leaf that fell that season without seeing her face alongside it. And I could not think of her face without thinking of her mother, and the broth, and the way everything I had been, everything I had carried across an ocean and a continent, finally found a place to be useful. I had come to Clarendon County on foot, mostly, with a few miles borrowed from a mule cart heading south out of Pueblo. My coat was good wool, at least. I had traded for it honestly. And my boots were holding, though not for much longer. I spoke English well enough by then, though the accent still turned heads in dry goods stores. People heard it and decided things about me before I had set down my hat. The town of Harwick was not much to look at. A mill that ran 3 days a week, a church with a cracked bell, a row of timber front shops along a road that turned to mud when the clouds came in from the mountains. I was looking for work of any kind. Wood cutting, hauling, mending fence. I had done all of it, and I was not proud about what I would do next. It was the druggist who told me about the Wren house. He said it carefully. The way men say things they are not sure they should say at all. There was a household on the east edge of town, he told me. A substantial one. Not a ranch, more of a proper residence, with a kitchen garden and a carriage house and hired help who came and went. The woman who ran it was the daughter of a once prominent family, unmarried, managing everything herself since her father had gone. Her mother was ill, had been ill for some months. Doctors had come from as far as Denver, and each one had left quieter than he arrived. The daughter, he said, was not an easy woman to approach. She was precise and capable and accustomed to disappointment. She'd recently let go her cook over some disagreement about the kitchen stores, and she needed someone to prepare meals. Simple ones, nothing elaborate, mostly to coax the old woman to eat. I asked if she was hiring. He looked at my coat, my boots, my face. "You can ask," he said. "She'll say no." I thanked him anyway and walked the half-mile east along the rutted road until a white fence appeared through the cottonwood trees. And beyond it, a house that had once been proud and was still trying to be. Smoke came from the kitchen chimney. A curtain moved in an upstairs window. I stood at the gate for a moment, hat in hand. Then I went in. The path to the door was swept clean, which told me something. However hard things had become inside that house, someone still cared enough to keep the entry presentable. There were 2 clay pots flanking the steps, empty of flowers now that autumn had come, but they were whole and upright and placed with intention. Small things, but I had learned to read small things. I knocked. A long silence followed. Then footsteps, deliberate, unhurried, and the door opened. She was perhaps 30, though worry had added years to the corners of her eyes. Dark hair pulled back without fuss. A gray dress, practical, the sleeves already rolled at the cuffs from morning work. She looked at me the way a person looks at weather, assessing, not yet alarmed, but watchful. I told her my name. I told her I had heard she needed someone to prepare meals and that I was a cook, and that I had come to ask for the chance to show her what I could do. She did not invite me in. She stood in the doorframe and studied me with the kind of attention that misses nothing. The worn leather of my satchel, the condition of my hands, the way I held my hat. "You're not from here," she said. I told her I was not. "Where from?" I told her Ireland, though the journey since had been a long one. She said nothing to that. Then, the last man I hired from the road took a ham and my father's pocket watch and was gone by Wednesday morning. I told her I understood. I told her I would work one full day for nothing, prepare whatever she needed, touch nothing that was not mine. And at the end of that day, she could tell me to leave, and I would go without argument. If she was satisfied, we could speak about terms. If she was not, she had lost nothing but a few hours. She was quiet for a moment. Behind her, from somewhere up the staircase, I heard a sound, faint, like a voice asking a question in another room. Her expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. "My mother cannot eat," she said, and her voice dropped the last word carefully, the way you set down something fragile. "She has no appetite. The doctors have tried everything they know. She's losing weight and she is losing strength, and I cannot—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I need someone who can make something she will want to eat. Not medicine, not broth from a tin. Something real." I told her I knew something about that kind of cooking. Not the grand sort, not dishes from a hotel menu, but the kind made for a person who has been sick a long while and needs to be brought back gently. The kind my grandmother made in a small stone kitchen in County Clare, when the body needed coaxing more than it needed curing. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "The kitchen is at the rear of the house," she said. "I'll show you where things are." The kitchen was large for a frontier house, larger than I expected. A cast-iron range with 6 burners and a warming shelf above. A long work table of scrubbed pine, copper pots hanging from a rack near the window, and a pantry door standing half open to show shelves of jarred goods and dried stores. It was the kitchen of a woman who had once intended to feed many people well. Now it had the quiet of a room that had forgotten its purpose. She moved through it efficiently, pointing to where things lived. Salt here, flour there, the cold cellar below through a hatch in the floor, the well out the back door 40 paces east. She opened the pantry and I saw what I needed to see. The shelves were not bare, but they were not thoughtful either. Purchased goods, mostly. Tinned things. Spices bought because someone said they were proper, not because anyone knew how to use them. What was missing was the small, humble category of ingredients that do the most work quietly. The ones a person learns from watching a grandmother move through a kitchen before dawn. I asked if there was a kitchen garden. She looked at me with a flicker of something. Suspicion or surprise, I could not be sure. She said there had been one, but it had not been tended properly this year. Too much else to attend to. I asked if I could see it. She led me out the back door and around to the south-facing side of the house, where the late afternoon light still held warmth. The garden was neglected but not ruined. Weeds had come, yes, but beneath them the perennials had done what perennials do. They had simply kept on living without being asked. I could see thyme gone leggy and wild, sage with woody stems but new growth at the tips, flat-leaf parsley still standing near the fence line, dusty but green. And in the far corner, half hidden by tall grass, something I did not expect to find this far from home, a sprawl of lovage, tall and feathery, with its particular scent that I had not smelled in years. I crouched down beside it and broke a small leaf between my fingers. She watched me do this without speaking. I told her I had what I needed for a first broth. Not a cure. I was careful to say that. I told her I had no claim to be a doctor and no wish to pretend otherwise. But I said there was a way of building a soup from the ground up, layer by layer, the way a fire is built, starting with the smallest, most certain things, and that this kind of broth had a particular quality for someone who had been sick a long while. It didn't ask anything of the body. It simply offered. She stood with her arms crossed against the evening air, looking at the garden I was crouching in, and I could not read her face entirely. But she had not walked away. She had not told me to stop. I took that as permission enough to begin. That evening I built the first broth in her kitchen, and I will say plainly that it was not the kitchen I was accustomed to working in. The range was iron and old, its damper stiff, and the wood she had stacked beside it was green, cut too recently, still holding its sap. A green fire burns low and sullen, and a sullen fire will ruin a broth as surely as the wrong herb. I did not say anything about this. I simply went out to the wood pile before the light failed entirely, sorted through until I found the boulder splits buried beneath, seasoned oak, dry through and through, and brought those in instead. She was watching from the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. I could feel it without turning. I asked for a clay pot if she had one. She did not. A heavy iron pot would do, but I asked her to set it in the oven first to warm slowly before any water touched it. She looked at me as though this were an eccentricity she was tolerating only because she had already committed to tolerating me. I understood that look. I had received it before. The lovage went in last. That was the important thing. The sequence mattered. I had learned this not from any book, but from a woman in the county of Meath who had kept a kitchen garden for 50 years, and who could tell you, without sentiment, exactly what each plant asked of you and what it offered in return. She had taught me that lovage is a proud thing. It doesn't blend. It asserts itself. You had to give it the last word, or it would overpower everything that came before it. I added the stems first, tied with a strip of cloth. Then the leaves only at the end, just long enough to release their oils into the broth without going bitter. The kitchen filled with a smell that was green and deep and faintly sweet, and I heard the woman in the doorway take a slow breath. She didn't comment on it, but she came a step closer. I strained it twice. The resulting liquid was pale gold, nearly clear, with a faint greenish cast. I ladled a small amount into a tin cup and held it out to her without ceremony. Not to the sick woman, not yet. I wanted her to taste it first, to know what she was bringing to her mother's room. She looked at the cup for a moment. Then she took it and drank a small sip. She didn't speak right away. She stood with the cup in both hands the way a person holds something warm when they are cold, and her expression shifted in a way that was hard to name. Not delight, exactly. Something quieter than that. She asked me how long it would take to know if it was helping. I told her honestly that I didn't know, that we would have to watch, that the body, when it has been ill a long time, is cautious about accepting kindness. It has to be persuaded slowly that it is safe to get well. She nodded at that, a slow, considering nod, the kind that means a person is weighing something they hadn't expected to find worth weighing. Then she turned and carried the cup back down the hall, and I heard the quiet knock, the murmur of voices. and a long silence that stretched out long enough that I found myself holding still beside the stove, listening without meaning to. She came back with the cup empty. She set it on the table without drama and told me her mother had finished it. All of it, without being coaxed. The old woman had not finished a full portion of anything in 11 days. I turned back to the pot and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. But inside I recognized the feeling, that small, careful opening that sometimes comes when the body decides, almost against its own will, to begin trying again. I had seen it before, once in a lumber camp after a fever that had taken 3 men and nearly taken a fourth. Once on a crossing where a woman had gone 2 weeks refusing food and then, on an unremarkable Tuesday, asked for bread. The body makes that turn quietly, without announcement. You have to be watching for it, and you have to respond without making a fuss, or it startles like a shy animal and retreats. I made a second, slightly larger portion for the evening. The same broth, the same herbs, the same long, low heat. But this time I stirred in a spoonful of barley that I had ground fine and let dissolve almost entirely, so it would not burden the stomach but would leave something more solid behind. Something the body could hold on to. She watched me do it. She had come back to the kitchen doorway, her new habit it seemed, and she stood there with her arms folded, not critically now, but with that same focused attention I had noticed in her from the beginning. This was not a woman who allowed herself to be idle. Even standing still, she was working, thinking, measuring. She asked me where I had learned to cook this way. Not from curiosity exactly, more like she was trying to place me, to understand what category of person I fit into. I told her a version of the truth, that I had learned from necessity, on long roads where there were no doctors and no kitchens, only what you could find and what you knew to do with it. That in the places I had come from before the frontier, people relied on what grew nearby, and that knowledge passed down through families the way other families passed down land or silver. She was quiet for a moment, then asked if I had family still. It was a careful question. She asked it the way a person asks something they want the answer to, but don't want to seem to want. I said I had people I came from, that not all of them were living, and that the ones who were far. She accepted that without pressing. Looked down at the floor once, briefly. Then she asked if I needed anything more from the pantry. I told her I did not need anything more from the pantry. I had what I needed. She nodded once, as though that settled something, and left me to it. I heard her footsteps on the staircase, not hurried, but purposeful. She was going back to her mother's room. That was what she did when she had no task that could hold her. She returned to the one room in the house where her helplessness was most visible, and she sat with it. I understood that. I had done it myself in other years, in other places. That evening I made a second preparation. Not the same as the morning's broth. Similar in its roots, different in its intention. The morning broth was meant to open the body, to coax the appetite awake, and ease the passages that illness draws tight. The evening preparation was meant for sleep, for quieting a body that had been fighting too long and had forgotten how to stop. I used dried chamomile and a careful measure of valerian root, both of which I had found pressed flat and brown in a linen envelope in the back of a kitchen drawer, likely placed there years ago and never touched since. I added a small amount of honey, and a single strip of dried lemon peel that I found in a stoppered glass jar, still faintly fragrant. The housekeeper watched me from the doorway while I worked. She was a sturdy woman, not unkind, but cautious in the way that people become when they have watched a household suffer and have not known how to prevent it. She asked me what I was making. I told her it was something to help the woman upstairs rest. She crossed her arms but said nothing more. I took that as neither approval nor objection, just waiting. I brought the evening cup upstairs myself. The woman in the bed looked different than she had that morning. Not dramatically, not in any way another person might have named easily, but I could see it. The tightness around her eyes had eased by some small degree. Her hands, resting on the quilt, were not gripping the fabric the way they had been. She looked at me when I entered. Her daughter was sitting near the window. She stood as I came in, out of habit or instinct, I could not say which. She watched me cross the room and set the cup carefully on the stand beside the bed. The woman asked me, in a voice that was thin but clearer than that morning, what it was. I told her it would help her sleep without dreaming too hard, that sometimes a body needed permission to rest, and this was simply a way of offering it. She looked at the cup for a long moment. Then she looked past me, at her daughter. Something passed between them, the kind of look that belongs only to two people with a long history. An entire conversation conducted without a single word. I stepped back to give them that space. Her daughter looked at me afterward, just briefly. I could not quite read what was in her face. She reached for the cup herself. That was what I remember most clearly. Not the trembling of her hand, not the slowness of the motion, but the fact that she did it without asking for help. There is a kind of pride in a sick person that the healthy often mistake for stubbornness. I had learned long ago to recognize it for what it truly was. The last flag a person plants in the ground when everything else has been taken from them. She would lift that cup on her own, or she would not lift it at all. Her daughter moved forward, just slightly, and then stopped herself. I saw the effort that stopping cost her. She pressed her lips together and stood still, and I thought that was one of the bravest things I had witnessed in that house. The old woman drank slowly. Not all of it. No one in her condition would have managed all of it at once, but more than half, taken in small measures with pauses between each sip. I watched her face as she drank. I was not watching for gratitude. I was watching for the small physical signs that told me the body was accepting what it was being given, rather than fighting it. The slight release of tension across the brow, the almost imperceptible settling of the shoulders. She set the cup back on the stand herself, too, which told me more than any of the rest of it. I excused myself quietly. There was nothing more useful I could do in that room, and I had learned that presence, past a certain point, becomes its own kind of burden on the sick. They perform for witnesses without meaning to. Alone, a body is free to simply be tired. In the kitchen, I banked the fire lower and set the remaining broth to rest covered at the edge of the stove, where it would hold its warmth without reducing further. I washed the things I had used. I had always found a steadiness in that kind of work. The ordinary tasks that ask nothing of you except attention. I heard footsteps in the hall some while later. Not the careful, measured step of a woman managing a household, but something quicker, less composed. She came through the doorway and stopped when she saw me still at the work table. I think she had expected to find the room empty. She did not speak immediately. I did not press her. After a moment, she said that her mother had fallen asleep. A real sleep, she said, not the restless kind. She had watched her for several minutes, and the breathing was slow and even, and her face was— She paused, searching for the word. Settled, she said. Her face was settled. I told her that was good. That was exactly what we were hoping for. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. It was not quite relief, and it was not quite gratitude, though it held something of both. It was something more searching than either of those. She asked me where I had learned to do this. I told her the truth, which was the only thing I had left to give her that evening. I told her about a woman in County Clare. Not young, not old, somewhere in that ageless place that certain women occupy, who have spent their lives in kitchens and gardens and the particular study of what the earth offers, up to those who know how to look. She had been a neighbor of my mother's. She had no formal learning, could not read a word of Latin or cite a single authority that the doctors of Dublin would have recognized. What she had instead was patience and attention and 40 years of watching what helped and what did not. She had taught me, I said, that the body sometimes knows what it needs before the mind can name it, that a broth made slowly and with intention carries something that cannot be measured, but can sometimes be felt by someone who has been too long without it. That certain roots and dried herbs do not cure by force, but by invitation. They remind the blood of what it once knew how to do. She was quiet while I spoke. She had taken a place against the doorframe, not quite entering the room, as though she had not fully decided whether to stay. Her arms were folded, but not in the closed manner I had grown accustomed to in those first days. It was more like someone holding themselves together carefully, the way you carry something fragile over uneven ground. I told her I had used this same broth twice before. Once for a man on a cattle drive outside of Ailing who had gone gray with exhaustion and fever. Once for a child in a settlement near the Platte River, though I did not linger on that one. Both times I had not known with certainty that it would help. That uncertainty, I told her, had never fully left me, and I would not pretend otherwise. She asked, quietly, whether I had been afraid tonight. I considered the question honestly before I answered. I said yes. Not for myself, but afraid in the way you are afraid when something matters and you cannot guarantee the outcome, when all you can do is bring what you know and hope it is enough. She looked at the work table for a moment, at the mortar and the dried stems, at the small cloth I had used to strain the broth. Then she looked back at me. She said she owed me an apology. I began to tell her that she did not, that her caution had been reasonable, that a woman in her position could not simply extend trust to a stranger without cause. But she shook her head slightly and said she was not speaking of caution. She was speaking of something smaller and less forgivable than that. The way she had looked at me those first mornings, the things she had assumed before I had done anything at all to earn such assumptions. I told her she did not need to say it aloud. She said she needed to say it for herself, not for me. There is a difference, she explained, and her voice was composed but not cold. The voice of a woman who had learned to be honest at some cost, and did not intend to stop now simply because honesty was inconvenient. She told me what she had thought when she first saw me come through the kitchen door that morning, with the cloth bundle under my arm. She described it plainly. Not cruelty. She was not a cruel person. But the small, quiet dismissal that comes so easily when a person has been raised to certain expectations and another person does not meet them. The assumptions that arrive before words do, before any deed is done. She had looked at my hands and seen roughness and thought roughness was all there was. She had heard my manner of speaking and measured it against the manner she had been taught to value. She said she was not proud of any of it. I listened. I did not interrupt, and I did not rush to absolve her. She had asked for honesty earlier, and it seemed right to offer her the same respect in return, to let her finish saying the things she had decided to say. When she was done, I told her that what she had described was not uncommon in my experience. I had arrived in this country carrying everything I owned in one bag, and I had learned quickly that a man like me, in a place like this, would need to prove himself not once, but many times over, and that the proving would sometimes feel like starting from nothing, no matter how much had already been demonstrated. I was not bitter about it. I had simply come to understand it as part of the particular life I was living. What I had learned, I told her, was that a person who eventually looks clearly at what is in front of them and changes what they think because of it is not a person to hold the earlier thinking against. It is the ones who look clearly and refuse to change who trouble me. She was quiet for a moment after that. The lamp between us had burned lower, and the kitchen had grown still, the way a house goes still very late at night when everything that was urgent has passed. Outside, the wind had settled into a long, even pull across the eaves, almost soft. She said she wanted to know more about where I had come from, if I was willing to tell it. Not to satisfy curiosity, though she admitted that was part of it, but because she realized she had been speaking to a stranger for nearly 3 weeks, and she did not know the first thing about who he was before he arrived at her door. I said I was willing. So I told her. I told her about the village in County Clare where I was born, which was so small it had no name that appeared on any map I ever saw. Only a cluster of stone walls and a church that leaked in 3 places and a road that turned to mud every winter without fail. I told her about my father, who was a fisherman and later a laborer, and later a man who sat very still by a window and looked out at something none of us could see. I told her about the crossing, which I will not linger on except to say that a man learns quickly on a ship what he is made of, and I had not been entirely certain before that voyage what the answer was for me. She listened. She did not rush me or redirect me. She kept her hands folded on the table and her eyes on my face, and she listened the way I had not been listened to in a very long time. I told her I had cooked on 3 different outfits before I came to her door: a cattle drive out of Texas, a mining camp in Colorado where the winters came early and stayed long, a small hotel in a Kansas town that eventually burned. I had learned the herb knowledge from a woman in that camp, an older Irish woman who had carried seeds and cuttings all the way from Galway in a tin box wrapped in cloth, and who believed, as her own mother had believed, that a body healing from the inside was the only healing that lasted. I had never had occasion to use it seriously until her mother's illness. I said I was glad it had not been too late. She said quietly that she was glad too. The lamp guttered once, then held. She asked me, not looking away, whether I intended to move on in the spring. I said I had not thought far, enough ahead to know. Then I said that was not entirely true. I said I had been thinking about it some, and that my thinking had changed recently, and that the direction it had changed was toward staying, if staying was something that was wanted. She looked at me for a long moment in that quiet kitchen, with the wind soft on the eaves and the house settled around us like something at rest. Then she said that she believed it was wanted, that her mother had told her so plainly only that morning, which had made her feel she had received advice she had not asked for, from a source she could not easily argue with. I smiled. I could not help it. She smiled too. That was the beginning of it. Not the broth, not the fever breaking, not any single moment I could name, but that kitchen, that lamp, that honest question and the honest answer I gave it. The rest came the way good things do on the frontier, slowly, quietly, and built to last.